All beaches are connected by ocean. You know, you could do it with a bridge too, but it'd be pretty inefficient 9 out of 10 times depending on the severity of ocean. I guess Death Stranding could have been about boats instead of bridges. Sam Porter boats. Much like the boy himself, I can be a bit of a cheeky motherfucker from time to time. Like if I make a wee screw up out of some sort of negligible ignorance and someone was to, say, correct me on that in a snarky, assuming sort of way, you best believe that from that point on I'm going to keep pretending like that thing don't exist just to revel in the salt of it all. And I had not seen Blade Runner until about a month ago. I watched it with two amazing boys you should subscribe to even, but prior to that, if I was to see some generic copy-paste cyberpunk garbo, I wouldn't have been able to call the influence, to the dismay of my comments. I'm not sure what could have been patient zero on this. It may have been my PC98 video where I called this shot from Possessioner Snatcher-esque and got at least a handful of saltchilds being all like, bro, what about Blade Runner? Yeah, well, what about it, fuckboy? I'm not gonna lie to you guys, I was this close to making this entire video pretending Blade Runner didn't exist. This close. It wouldn't have been funny to anyone but me being me and me being the one making the video for me. First and foremost, I totally would have done it as well, regardless of how the majority of not-me's would have felt about it. Until, at least, I saw a random tweet showing off some Blade Runner concept art. And while I hadn't yet played Snatcher either, I did recognize this shot from footage I stole off of YouTube for part 2 of my retrospective, and yeah, they outright fucking traced it. Now, I'm not against tracing at all. I think it's perfectly acceptable to creatively botch your way through something that you, as the creator, might consider secondary to the actual part that you yourself would want to get to. Like how some YouTubers use stock music. They just don't care that much, don't have cinematic or music brain, and just want to share their right think, talk, or opinion brains instead. It's fine. Cutting corners is fine. But it's also pretty striking how blatant the influence is here. I mean, seeing Blade Runner was surreal for me in the same way that watching Twin Peaks was a few years ago. In that I see so many bits and pieces of things that I love emerge from the movie as it goes. Not even talking like the copy-paste cyberpunky tropes that are very directly influenced, because I barely fuck with that shit in the first place. Nah, I'm talking like Midgar, Kowloon's Gate, Galarians, the 25th Ward, or Mirror's Edge. I see little bits of Blade Runner pop up all over my internal brain library of cool shit, from the music and the dense, moist, neon-laden Asian cities, which, I mean, I guess is just what Chinese cities look like, but it makes a big impression here given how noirish it's brought to life. To, of course, the thematic things, like how it's very lower-class focused, how it's about what humanity even be, how it's about corporate control, and so on and so forth. And you see motifs of those things emerge all over Kojima's work as well. Part of that is also Japan's general obsession with robotics, which would produce obvious questions, but I think, given that Snatcher exists, it's pretty safe to say it's left a mark on a boy. Hell, he keeps referencing the coat, which up to this point I was just calling the Kojima coat, which I will also keep doing as he has earned it. But yeah, Snatcher is very Blade Runner. Aside from it literally stealing parts like an OG, the idea of what a Snatcher is, i.e. a robo-person who need to die cause fake and bad maybe, is almost exactly what a replicant is in Blade Runner. Gillian also looks exactly like Mr. Part-Time over here, and of course, the look of it all is also quite similar. But, on the other hand, that is also it. It goes into its own little direction, offers plenty of crazy scenarios and characters that one can actually relate to and care for and, like, understand and listen to, which isn't really something I can say Blade Runner had, and also, the Chad Konami sound team greatly outshines the Virgin Vangelis and his wispy 80s synth garbage with some amazing Sega CD funk. Hell yeah, motherfucker. You know, it's a goddamn Snatcher review when you can hear this fucking song blare away in the background like Jesus. Anyway, welcome to the first bridge, The Strand, aka Dutch Beach. I hope whoever shared that to Wooly got it from me, because I'm gonna keep mentioning it as it's just too funny.
Don't throw my phone across the room!
A retrospective subseries made up of loosely tied together essays all about the devs left behind at Konami. aka the bridges burnt by Kojima, aka the dust, the ashes of the bridges burnt in the white whale's wake. The influences of Ahab himself, and per result of both, all of the games loosely tied to his existence one way or another. We're gonna talk about games made in the MGS2 engine that you don't even know exist yet. Goddamn games that have Snake in it that never left Japan. Games Kojima produced in the most tangential manner possible while still getting top bill credit. And of course, the game that started it all. By which I mean Snatcher. I ain't touching Metal Gear 1 and Penguin Pengus again, cause yeah, I do see Snatcher as his first real main game. Funny as it is to think about now, Metal Gear was just a project he kind of inherited. A simple little game quite far into development that was just losing its direction, upon which he said, MSX slow dough, so what about stealth? Also, I like movies, let me write some shit. And that was that. I don't know if one could really say that that game was his vision per se, as evidenced by him not originally wanting to even produce a sequel, only doing so after Konami did so without him anyway, thus fueling his then fully engorged post-Snatcher director boner, because Snatcher is him getting to be him at a studio where he was too much of a busboy to be him proper prior. It is a game that he wrote, a game that he directed depending on which credits you see, a game that he cooked up in his brain while watching movies. It has many of the tropes that his later titles would also have, and moreover, it is a game that didn't have like a billion co-writers and other team members helping him along. And so, I think that Snatcher, together with Policeknauts, which I will also discuss once more in this very video, make for a perfect lens to view Kojima's style through, so that we may establish what it is, what he likes doing, how he does it, and how others might have helped him to do it better later, so that later I can be all like, hey, people call this game a Kojima game, but I don't know about that, and so on. We good? We good. So Snatcher is, in essence, a game about Gillian Seed hunting down Robo-Boy body snatchers in the futuristic city of Neo-Kobe whilst dealing with his own memory loss, tons of violent murders, and many a sexy babe. And it plays like a visual novel adventure, with the options and the examines and the many dialogues and mostly just a story. Occasionally there is shoot, but for the most part there is talk. Long-winded, juicy, spicy, sexy, funny, crazy, make sure you examine things multiple times to progress type talk, with a quality not unlike the MGS Codex. You're hit with this after the positively grintastic 100% Thorcore rock-solid perfect opening sequence at the very first gameplay screen. You can do shit, look at shit, and hear questionably in-character Kojima waffles about literally everything, like the receptionist who is a beautiful Oriental woman. And then a few screens later, you learn about this dude's daughter who just turned 18. And wouldn't you know, she's a model too. Yeah, that's right. Right here, class, we see one of the first Kojima core tenets, which I will list now. Horny on the main with my boomer brain. Then we also have big movie and or book reference, which in this case is pretty fucking obvious. Blade Runner and Body Snatchers. Fuck the fourth wall. Everyone's a metaphor, in the sense that many of his games are also autobiographical in a hidden sort of way, though this wouldn't fully become a thing until MGS2 mostly, but Snatch does have some deeper meaning, silly name shit. Explain everything, cause I thought of everything! With very deeply and sometimes badly expository writing following in tow, which I will get into more later. Bigu cutscene, I will definitely get into this one later. Innovative, awkward, contextualized, and thematically appropriate gameplay. We'll also touch upon this one in a little bit, though with this being a visual novel, only so much could be done, of course. Poo-poo pee-pee. Actually, not that very heavily featured here, aside from you literally being able to take a shit at Gillian's apartment, and that he for some reason harshly judges everyone else's bathrooms, which is a thing, I guess. Politic. War nuke bad. People isolate. Big brother technology scary. Iffy on the capitalism thing. Cold War. But really though, just war bad mostly. I'll discuss this because of course I will. And finally, Lamau, you don't know shit. And live your life. Go outside. Leave your mark and pass it on. Which, no spoils for this video, but let's just say that they're there for sure, and we'll also touch upon this lightly in regards to how he structures his stories a bit later. And additionally, there's the fact that an overwhelming writing quirk of his is self-referentialism. He'll do one thing, like say, give Gillian the Blade Runner code of previous mention, which then later will get re-referenced in MGS4 and Death Stranding, where slowly, through association, it grows to mean more than the sum of its parts. A lot of Kojima's deep stuff kind of comes down to that, really. How he keeps regurgitating themes or catchphrases like the "pretty good" or the "kept you waiting, huh?" Things that initially were nothing but a wee quip or movie or book reference, suddenly becoming these really hefty, meaningful things upon reuse. And already, you see the early beginnings of that here with Metal Gear. Superstar final boss of the original Metal Gear and Gillian's rock-solid partner in crime.
Metal Gear? That's a pretty weird name.
But yeah, let's cross-reference these tenets with Snatcher and later on a little bit with Policeknauts, which I've actually already reviewed before a few years ago. Snatch bears a lot in common with it, as just like it, you can examine a very regular sofa and learn that it's made out of space technology fiber cushions invented by a legendary Japanese company or whatever the fuck. And it'll be like that with everything, anything, and anyone and everyone. The types of clothing someone is wearing, the furnishing on their desk, a painting on the wall, a random plant or ashtray. It's quite similar to how in the MGS games you could get hyper-detailed codec lore dumps on all of the pick-uppables. Only big diff there being is that you had these types of specialist characters who had reasons to know shit and reasons to explain it to Snake who needed to know shit. And as to how Gillian, Mr. Average McPerson McMahon guy, knows the inner workings of every object in a room ever is beyond me, because we ain't like that either with like everything in our own homes, let alone anyone else's. So, well, it kind of fails to flesh out the characters here, at least for the most part. Like, there is some good quirky character nuggets in there too. It does tell you a lot about this super cool world, and above all, the man who made up and wrote it. Also, Gillian is a very matter-of-fact type of dude, so it does work out in terms of its dryness, and a lot of the exposition stuff comes from Metal Gear as well, and he's a robot, so of course he knows everything. And it's also nowhere near as long-winded as Policeknauts or any of the codecs were, which is pretty great in this case, as they are super-duper relevant to the gameplay.
What the?
It's Little John.
Little John?
Like, sure, the dude may have horned on about a dead man's just barely legal daughter and her being a model with a heart-shaped mole on her inner thigh, but she does squish you on about this before she lets you into her home for investigative purposes. Additionally, if you see phone numbers on billboards or signs in the background, you can fucking ring them up whenever for all kinds of neat shit. Like being able to call Konami itself and have the phone lady gloat about their new product called Snatcher finally being released globally. Quite similar to how the MGS games had secret codecs. 3 especially did some really cool shit with that, so it's neat to see it here this far back in the timeline. Unlike those codecs though, who rarely locked any hard progress behind their banter aside from MGS1 and usually just defaulted to fun side stuff, it'll very certainly see your own attention to its attention to detail being rewarded by you actually being able to play the goddamn game. Which makes sense, it is a detective game after all, no less a fairly traditional Japanese menu-based adventure game, just with a very well realized Kojima twist. You see, your little robo-boy Metal Gear can scan stuff, analyze shit on the spot, make video phone calls, probe into things with his little babby arms, and store items. That's like all adventure game tropes given a reason to be there right there. And Gillian is also a smooth talker, and not someone who ain't afraid to get down and dirty direct to the point, and so the endless interviewing and questioning makes more sense for these two to do too than it do for most other adventure game protags. It all just fits very well contextually, I guess. You find a corpse and then you look at it yourself as Gillian, make sure who he be, search the pockets to find a key, and then have Metal Gear scan his ass for a cause of death and for a quick ID, have him detect additional items on a person that he can grab, scan, and then carry for you so that when back at base, you can use these things, including the name that you totally remember in the big database PC to find out even more. Hand type it in there, why don't you? It's like, you are just clicking through endless menus for sure, but it doesn't necessarily feel like you are, as all the details one can learn will be used for something later, and even the most banal of questions will have a plan and a purpose, thus making it feel more like you're actually investigating. So yeah, I'm pretty sure that both explain everything and contextualized gameplay can be ticked. By the way, also a low-key tenet is self-insertion, because man, Man likes inserting. As stated, the game has a PC database with all types of in-world history factoids based on real-world history factoids and predictions, in which you can read all about how Neo Kobe is isolated, and how it's an immigrant heaven, and how many of its people are poor and homeless, and how some have abandoned modern society because of its problems like poverty and heavy monitoring, and how the city is also segregated based on class, and how there's also tons of propaganda for the army, not to mention the fact that a nuclear explosion fucked up the world, which resulted in a Third World War, hence why the city now has so many immigrants who fled the war, but also because of the explosion all nukes have been eliminated, yet their space debris, drug, powder, substance shit may still be around, and also Russians? Many of these themes could be considered standard cyberpunk tropes in this case, but really I could apply the last few sentences to a video on Death Stranding or any of the MGSs or Policeknauts and have to change very little to make them fit. So I think we can tick the Warbat Russians McPolitic box just as well, not to mention the over-explainy one if we hadn't just already did that. Dude Defo likes to reuse his themes though, doesn't he? I'd rag on it, but honestly, I think it just shows how strongly he feels about these things. Same way with his games, including this one, always ending with a big dick message about needing to live your life and pass things on. Like he himself is doing with each and every one of his games by ramming his beliefs into your head. A big way how he does that, aside from just repeating shit, is by sometimes just cutting the bullshit and speaking to you directly. MGS2 and 4's ending is quite infamous for this, but also Policeknauts has a lot of that, almost to a detriment at times. And Death Stranding certainly read like his manifesto/diary at times too. But in Snatcher, I don't think he quite had a handle on that idea just yet. Metal Gear 2 had it, and Solid had it big, so I think he only realized how the fourth wall was his weapon then and there. What we get here is only shit like, "Gillian, I hear a noise. Please turn up your TV." And it's like, bitch, I'm on an emulator. My monitor doesn't admit sound. How dare you? But no, I still turn up my speakers all the way in order to hear the thing, and yeah, there's like a bleepy sound there, isn't there? Oh my god.
Jeez, my ears are really ringing.
Yeah, Jesus.
That's because you left the volume turned up.
Gillian also declares later that he's hamming things up for the gamers at home, and certain gamey bits like saving and, as stated, the rest of the gameplay are wholly integrated into the universe and discussed as such. So fuck the fourth wall certainly gets a tick, if only as a bit less realized version of it. Weirdly enough though, I had assumed that the Bigu cutscenes tick may have needed a skip. MGS2, you see, is comparatively light on plot compared to any of its solid cousins, even if it still had a bunch of long conversations for its time. And I had expected similar things here, but nah. 30 fucking minutes is the longest uninterrupted, fully voiced cutscene sequence in Snatcher. On a 16-bit console, too. I know it has the power of the Sega CD, but Jesus, color me impressed. Granted, not all dialogue in the game is voiced, and there is also a lot of still imagery going on, of course, too, but even then, the sprite art looks great. The sound design done by a whole gang of folks, including Silent Hill's Akira Yamaoka, is excellent, as is the score by the same crew. And the voice acting is surprisingly great and above all plentiful, certainly for its time. Like, this is making most PS2 games look bad with its cinematic prowess. It's really quite something. Thus, ticking the Bigu cutscene box with a plum. Whatever the fuck a plum may be. A common trend in Kojima stories is the main character not knowing shit. You could say that this is a thing common in many mysteries, but it really isn't exactly. A lot of your Detectivo or Action Hank type protags are incredibly capable and tend to rely on unreliable narrator shit to turn things around, like the hero often having a secret ace up their sleeve. Which, in Kojima stories, not so much. I mean, Snake in Metal Gear 2 and Solid didn't know shit. Raiden in MGS2 really didn't know shit. Big Boss in 3 didn't know shit initially and knew more on his second attempt, but it then subverts that by making the known shit a part of a much larger, still unknown shit. And Sam in Death Stranding also didn't know shit. It's usually in the lesser stories like Peace Walker or V or 4 where the shits are known. Or in the case of Peace and V, there wasn't a lot of shit to know, and in 4, there's just so much shit going on that everyone's just kinda acting on instinct, which worked well enough, but made a lot of the twists feel poorly built up to. As you see, it is exactly the avoiding of that as to why the shits remain unknown. You get to relate to your character as you also don't know shit. It provides an easy way in for tons of exposition, which Kojima loves, and in the case of games like Death Stranding or MGS2, it is used to have the main cast figure out what's going on together, providing plot twists in the form of speculation and theories either being proven right or wrong. It's a clever trick that has its origins here in Snatcher, as Gillian not only knows fuck all but also has a team of people backing him who also know fuck all. And so the game rolls as a very satisfyingly unraveling mystery in which trails go from ice cold to smoldering hot to looping back around and much more, as all of the knowledge gained and betrayed across the board results in quite a few potential twists. Shit's great, very gripping, and I can see why Mana reuse it, even if subconsciously. And with that, the final box is ticked. I think it's safe to say that this is defo a very Kojima-ass game in it, if there ever even was any doubt, as even without the boxes, there's still the less tangible, more abstract elements like the simple tone of it all.
Snatchers are believed to hide in areas plentiful in Snow 9, a snow-like bioengineered pollen crystal. As such, Snow 9 can always be detected in places they appear.
Yeah, that's a very MGS1-esque codec convo if I ever heard one. Anyway, Snatcher had no co-writers from what I can tell. It did have Jeremy Blaustein, this time not as a translator, and Mitsuhiro Togo of apparently only this game's fame do some scenario rewrites, which, as I understand it, means that they would have been editors and in this case probably also some pretty beefy localization help, but as I also understand it, they could have been more like advisors, going over Kojima's script and pitching in a few minor changes here and there. Otherwise, it defo seems to be his script. He's the writer and the scripter, going by all available credits among all of the different versions. Hideo wrote this, which isn't really as clear-cut with the MGS games or Death Stranding, which had in some cases up to 2 or 3 co-writers writing the often gargantuan scripts. Suppose a lot of it would have been side writing like the codex, tutorials, item descriptions, or notes or emails, things Kojima may have just shot some general ideas for but didn't want to fully write himself, which is why I wanted to look at Snatcher so badly, as this is a much briefer, far smaller scale game where he is the sole main writer, in order to really solidify which quirks is his so that we can apply them to the oodles of other games that carry his name, and to maybe even pin some blames. Cause, I mean, man's games ain't perfect. Not even referring to the downfall of MGS. I covered all of that, and that's very blatantly just a case of Konami constantly wanting a studio to shit out more games despite the several clear-cut endings the series has had throughout it doing that. As I've stated before, the writing crew only deserves props for making games like MGS4 or Peace Walker work even remotely. Things I'm more so a bit taken with is the overly explainy, character-breaky writing that was there even in the far more sleekly written Death Stranding and legit ruined some otherwise good moments, and his penchant for the bad hornies. So, with that in mind, let's take another quick look at Policeknauts. People often say that Hideo Kojima is up his own ass, and I personally don't think so. Like, MGS4 is up its ass, but not up Hideo's, as it is inverse MGS2, being that instead of fuck a fan service sequel, y'all don't want it, it is okay, fuck you, here you go bitch, take it. It is selfless indulgence, even despite his ever-growing Hideo head, aka his big dick, serving only to serve fans with maybe even the overt sexualization being kind of a y'all want this, right? It was funny when I showed the ass, right? Look at the ass! Sort of thing, now that I think about it. But Policeknauts is defo a bit up Kojima's ass, in that it liberally fondles everyone else's. The game is horny, and not in a healthy sort of way, but in that slap him on the ass, say toots as you walk by casual sexual harassment sort of way. And as we've seen now, it is in Snatcher 2. Besides, I've played MGS5 and 4 in Peace Walker. I now know how Kojima can be with this shit. It is him. Now, Death Stranding, aside from one kind of voyeur-y camera angle, ain't really like that, and MGS3 in particular has some great gals in him, so it's not like Kojima is a raging sexist, he's cancel, but man, you really don't see many people address this shit either, and it is a pattern-ass pattern. It was there in the 80s, it was there in the 90s, somehow less so in the 2000s for a bit, but oh boy did it ever come back in the 10s. Peace Walker is quite egregious with the fucking X-ray cam, and I've said enough about quiet. And again, I have nothing against horny. Hell, I like horny, but there's horny okay and horny please contact HR, and this is way into the latter category when it really shouldn't have to be. Girls can be pretty, characters can be flirty, a titty can even pop out, like, I'm down. But when every female character needs to get groped or smelled with little to no consequences, it starts feeling bad, man. And that ain't even saying shit about the biovestites. So in the version of the game that I played back in 2017, there was a line that read as follows. This is a strip club filled with so-called women who've undergone complete sex changes. I was inside there for a case once. They're called biovestites, people who've had sex changes through gene therapy. This city's infamous for them, unfortunately. To me, this seemed needlessly bigoted, mean-spirited, and a bit out of left field tonally, but I only lightly pointed that out. It was just another questionable line in between all of the sugar titsing, ass eating, and best friend's daughter fucking that Jonathan blurts out over the course of the entire game, which all felt kinda shitty due to how literal, character breaking, and direct Kojima brain drainy a lot of the game's writing was. However, in the comments, a slightly bigger deal was made out of it in various ways. Many people rightfully came out with, oh wow, that's shitty. I didn't know he was that shitty. Some came up with, bro, are you SJW? Like, I see no problem with critiquing the gender situation. Some even went, yes, good. And others pointed out, like I also did, that many of this is meant to be jokey and not super serious, but also, as I did not consider like a fool at the time, that this may be a translator thing. And the boy Devin, upon playing through the more modern Saturn translation a little while ago, did indeed not encounter the hatefulness.
Strip club for dancers who've undergone complete sex changes. I was inside for a case once. They're called transgenders. People who've had a sex change through genetic modification. The city is famous for them.
So, a good call in my eyes would be to play through a smidge of the OG Japanese version and ask multiple people who speak Japanese what it say.
Well, the innocent little bistro. Real business is selling VR. What?
Here's a very direct translation of the original script. It is a show pub with dancers who have had sex change surgeries. Had to go inside there for a case once. Biohalves, who have undergone genetic manipulation for a total biological sex change. A specialty of this town. Okay, now, the biohalf thing comes from a Japanese term, new half, which is a term used for trans folks that's still quite actively used, even if by some considered to be derogatory. Really, it's hard to directly translate shit like that as the term doesn't have an English equivalent per se, so I can kind of see how they ended up with biovestite, if not for like transvestite not being at all the same thing as transgender, so it misses the mark in that sense. Regardless, it's kind of a boomery way of saying it. A bit like calling them bio-T-words anno 1995. Not quite what you'd want to hear today, but not as outright hateful as the PS1 version makes it sound. There's none of that unfortunately and women in quotation mark shit as Kojima and Jonathan just weren't as bad as the OG fan translation made them seem. So that's good, and it's also good that the same team later at least tried to correct that for the Saturn version. What is very much present in all lingos though, and very much Kojima, is the unconsensual boob groping. According to a Kotaku article, according to a Famitsu article, according to Hideo Kojima, him and Sony's Shuhei Yoshida had a long discussion about the boob touching and jiggles. Yoshida wanted it toned down, but Kojima himself was deeply adamant about keeping it. Even further, including more gropables in the Saturn version later on, in what could only be described as some type of wicked revenge act. As weird as it is to say though, the boob groping isn't really the most egregious thing in this game, but it still feels like a weird bit of horniness that's kind of forced upon the player in a sense, which is pretty much where my beef with it lies. It's almost as if Kojima sits down next to you, opens up his zipper and says, "Yo, this is hot, right? Hey, you wanna jerk off with me?" Like, nah, bruh, I'm good. But thanks for asking, I guess. Otherwise, though, Policenauts is pretty great. If not way too over-explainy for its own good, though I do like a good Kojima waffle and didn't mind it all. Either way, I've reviewed it and won't repeat what I've said there here. But it checks all off the boxes. Big movie and or book reference is there in the form of every science fiction novel ever, and Lethal Weapons characters. Fuck the fourth wall is there in that you're acknowledged many a time. Everyone's a metaphor is less of a thing, but there's some wacky meta there for sure. Explain everything, cause I thought of everything is there in the sense that this game is the poster child of that, so no need to explain everything. Bigu cutscene. The game is a cutscene. Innovative, awkward, contextualized, and thematically appropriate gameplay is included in the same way as Snatcher do, just a bit less well thought out, but fun all the same. Poo poo pee pee is there in that, yes, there is a toilet joke, haha, so stinky. Politic, I mean, it's a story about society and big business being so fucked that they started an ad-based oligarchical police state space colony post-space race, so I think this game has you covered. Lamau, you don't know shit. Jonathan is a man out of his time in a foreign space world he literally knows nothing about, so yeah. And finally, live your life, go outside, leave your mark, and pass it on is huge, big dick, massive repped in a way that's ever so mildly incestuous, which I won't spoil how exactly, because you kind of need to see that shit for yourself to believe it. Self-insertion, aka LOL, I'm in the game, is there, I think. Like, I'm pretty sure that you straight up find a copy of the game somewhere at least, though I'd have to replay the whole thing to say for sure. You tell me. In either case, given how consistently his games tick these boxes, similarly to how I tick them all in a different way in my Death Stranding video, it's safe to say that these quirks all belong to Kojima himself. You get a lot of fanboy posturing about secret co-writers and him losing or gaining various skills, but really, all of his games are super consistent, and again, I wanted to hard establish this as to A, create a handy way to wave away all of the "actually, it's Fukushima, blah blah blah" level neckbeardisms, and to B, as already stated, with us now going forward with this retrospective thing, cross-referencing it with all of the other Kojima adjacent titles, what he's gotten big credit for, wrongfully in my opinion, and will thusly highlight plenty of other crazy creatives under his wing. Everyone, these be the bridges.